Hi friend, a new one again. Murder on the Orient Express 2017 full movie explanation in English. I'm doing. In the 1930s, the film begins near the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. Hercule Poirot, Kenneth Branagh, a renowned Belgian investigator, tries to figure out who stole a sacred relic from a room where a priest, a rabbi, and an imam were holding a discussion under the watch of the chief of police. Poirot, who is shown to be fussy, bordering on OCD about everything in his life being balanced, as evidenced by his sending back 2 eggs he'd planned to eat because they were different sizes, deduces from a single crack left on the wall that the perpetrator was the chief of police, as the religious figures, leading modest lives, having no reason to steal the relic, and was wearing soft shoes, unlike the chief, who tries but fails to flee. Poirot is looking forward to his approaching holiday and taking a break from detective work now that the criminal has been apprehended and the relic has been recovered. Poirot boards a boat from Istanbul, where he meets a governess named Mary Debenham, Daisy Ridley, as well as a young black doctor named Arbuthnot, Leslie Odom Jr. When he arrives, he runs into his old acquaintance Bouc, Tom Bateman, who is now the director of the famous Orient Express. Unfortunately, just as the two are reuniting, a telegram from London arrives for Poirot, requesting his quick attention. Poirot is irritated that his long-awaited vacation is being cut short, but Bouc offers to transport him to France via the Orient Express. The journey will last 3 days, and Poirot is content to have that much time to relax. When Bouc arrives at the railway station, he is surprised to see that all of the compartments have been booked, a rare occurrence, but one of the passengers has failed to show up on time, and his ticket has been forfeited. Along with Debenham and Arbuthnot, there's Samuel Rachel, Johnny Depp, his servant Edward Masterman, Derek Jacobi, and secretary Hector McQueen, Josh Gad, Austrian professor Gerhard Hardman, Willem Dafoe, and American socialite Mrs. Hubbard, Michelle Pfeiffer, Italian auto salesman Beniamino Marquez, Manuel Garcia Rolfo, Princess Dragomarov, Judi Dench, and her aide Hildegard Schmidt, Olivia Colman, disgruntled missionary Pilar Estravados, Penelope Cruz, and the Count and Countess Andreni, respectively played by Sergei Polyanin and Lucy Boynton. Although Poirot is annoyed at having to share his room with McQueen, the first night and day pass without incident. Ratchet approaches Poirot the next evening, requesting that he serve as his bodyguard for the rest of the trip, as he has been receiving threatening letters from past clients to whom he sold fake paintings. Poirot, who dislikes Ratchet right away, rejects on the grounds that he hunts down criminals and won't aid them. Ratchet offers ever-increasing sums of money and even threatens Poirot with a gun, but Poirot refuses to be bought or scared and walks away disgusted. Poirot, who had been relocated to Bouc's cabin, looks forward to a nice night's sleep but finds it in short supply. First, there is a noise from the compartment next to his, Ratchet's, but when the conductor, Pierre Michel, inquires about it, a voice responds that everything is okay. A bell and a knock also wake Poirot awake, and during the commotion, he notices a figure in a red kimono sprinting down. Meanwhile, an avalanche occurs, stopping the train in its tracks and trapping everyone on the track. Poirot is pushed from his bed and sees Marquez cleaning up spilled pictures. Everyone will have to wait for a rescue crew to be dispatched because the express was scheduled to arrive at their next station the next day. In the morning, Poirot discovers that Ratchet has been stabbed multiple times in his bed during the night, in a typical locked door mystery. Bouc asks Poirot to look into the situation, but Poirot first declines. After all, he was meant to be on vacation. Bouc begs him to investigate the murder, claiming that the Yugoslav police will be looking for a scapegoat and may target Marquez or Arbuthnot. When confronted with this, a frustrated Poirot accepts. Poirot knows that any of the other passengers or conductor may be the murderer after ascertaining that no one left or entered the carriage during the night and that no one is on the train who shouldn't be. He appoints Bouc as his assistant. Bouc could not be the murderer because he was asleep in another wagon. Ratchet was stabbed 12 times, according to the investigation, but the wounds are not consistent, some are lethal, while others are shallow. He appoints Bouc as his assistant. Bouc could not be the murderer because he was asleep in another wagon. Ratchet was stabbed 12 times, according to the investigation, but the wounds are not consistent, some are lethal, while others are shallow. This implies that the murderer was inebriated, but Ratchet was physically fit, armed, and wary, so he was unlikely to be overwhelmed. They discover the threatening messages in his chamber, as well as a partially burned memo linking Ratchet to the Daisy Armstrong case. Daisy Armstrong was a young girl who was abducted and murdered despite her family paying the ransom, causing her mother Sonia, Miranda Rayson, to go into preterm labor, killing both her and her unborn child, with Daisy's father committing suicide shortly after. Daisy's murderer, Lanfranco Cassetti, got away with the crime, and Poirot and Bouc quickly deduce from the evidence that Ratchet was Cassetti and whomever killed him had a connection to that case. More evidence is discovered in Mrs. Hubbard's chamber, including a blood-stained handkerchief with the initial H and a button from a conductor's uniform. She had previously been claiming someone was in her room. An examination of Michelle's outfit reveals that all of the buttons are present, prompting a search of everyone's bags except for the Count and Countess as they have diplomatic immunity. When the kimono he observed the night before is discovered in his suitcase, Poirot deduces that the perpetrator is attempting to outsmart him. Mrs. Hubbard is stabbed in the back later, but the wound is slight and she is unable to determine who did it. The uniform with the missing button is eventually discovered on an overhead rack, thereby ending the investigation. When a rescue team arrives, they begin the process of removing the Orient Express from the snow. When Poirot and Bouc meet with McQueen, they learn that he had been stealing money from Cassetti's accounts and that he had a motive for the murder. They also discover a link to the Daisy Armstrong case. McQueen's father tried to prosecute Armstrong's nursemaid, prompting her to commit suicide, and his career was ruined after the truth was out. As his interviews and investigations progress, Poirot discovers that many of the passengers had a connection to Daisy Armstrong. Princess Dragomarov was Sonia Armstrong's godmother and a friend of her mother, Linda Arden. Schmidt was the Armstrongs' cook. Arbuthnot was in the army with Daisy's father. Marquez was the family's chauffeur. Pilar was Daisy's nursemaid and had fallen asleep when Daisy's governess was Debenham and the Armstrong family's butler was Masterman. The Countess Andrenyi, who is Helena Goldenberg, Daisy's aunt, is the most significant link. Despite this, Poirot is unable to pinpoint the perpetrator of the crime. While questioning Debenham about the murder, he is met by Arbuthnot, who claims responsibility for the murder and is also hinted to be Debenham's secret lover. He tries but fails to shoot Poirot, then flees. Poirot recognizes that Arbuthnot did not intend to kill him. He was a sharpshooter in the army and would never have missed a shot at such close range, and insists that all the suspects be brought together, which they are. In the time, Poirot reveals that the murder can be solved in two ways, the first of which is simple but unlikely. Cassetti was assassinated by one of his many enemies, known as Ratchet, who boarded the train and then fled after the murder. The second theory is far more bizarre, but it better matches the facts. Everyone on board was involved in the murder. Even more ties to the Daisy Armstrong case have been discovered by Poirot. Gerhart Hardman is actually an American detective named Cyrus who was in love with the nurse wrongfully accused, who turns out to be Michelle's sister, and Mrs. Hubbard is Linda Arden. He reasoned that, in order for no one person to be held liable, no one knows who killed Cassetti, because all of the suspects entered his room and stabbed him in turn as a sort of execution. Arden acknowledges that she was the one who brought everyone together, determined to hold Cassetti accountable for what he did to her daughter and granddaughter. Poirot tells Arden that he is now the only one who can disclose their scheme, and he challenges someone to shoot him while leaving his gun on the table. Arden snatches it up and tries to shoot herself, but the gun isn't loaded because Poirot was only curious what she would do with it. As Arden sobs, he stands there watching. The train is discovered and resumes its journey. Poirot concludes that there will be no justice in this case because everyone on board had already suffered immensely as a result of Cassetti's act, and Cassetti was an awful guy who had gotten away with murder and deserved to be punished. He acknowledges that he will have to live with the inequity of allowing 12 individuals get away with murder. When the train arrives at the station, Poirot informs the police that his first theory is correct. The murderer was a Ratchet foe who had escaped. The passengers continue on their journey, and the cops believe him. At this moment, Poirot chooses to depart the train, ready to get some rest. However, his reputation precedes him once more, and he is approached by a courier who informs him that he is needed in Egypt owing to a death on the Nile. Despite his exhaustion, Poirot accepts the case, pausing for a brief moment to watch the Orient Express fade into the